Okay, welcome to the Node.js post-mortem working group on July 18th. It is today. We're just waiting for a few, to see if there's any other attendees who are gonna make it. So probably another, 3 or 4 minutes. But I wanted to start the live stream so anybody who's watching knows that we are ramping, getting ready to get going any minute now. I'll just paste the link to the minutes if you can add yourself there as well. Oops, not what I meant to do. Okay. Let's see, it's about 5 after. We'll wait 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, well, I'm thinking we should get started. We're at 7 minutes after the hour. So just looking at the agenda. So on the agenda is starting with a stand-up, going through the actions from last meeting, talking about where we should put code that we're collaborating on, issue number 30, discussion of JavaScript API to support common extensions between MDD, MDD, LLDB, IDE. And Node report is a module bundled into Node. That may be a bit premature, but just wanted some feedback on the concept. Any other things that people want to add to the agenda? Okay, I'll take the silence as a no, so let's move on to the stand-up. So let's go in the order we have in the attendees. So you're first.
I haven't really had a chance to do much of anything recently when it comes to post-mortem. Michael and Richard and I have been working on a talk to sort of discuss the post-mortem working group in general, but that's about it.
Yep. Post-mortem work group for, right. Okay. Dave.
Yeah, I also haven't had a ton of time to do a whole lot. I did meet with Yunong. I think that was since the last working group. We met to talk about, the kinds of stuff that kinds of background information that would be useful for someone trying to work on MDB v8, to try and get that information more broadly available. That's about it.
Okay. On v8. Okay. Joshua.
I've had even less time than Dave, so I haven't really done anything.
Okay. I'm just going to. Okay. No time. Sorry, just trying to take the notes as we go to myself. So as I mentioned, we're collaborating on a talk related to the overall work being done by the post-mortem work group. Also working with Richard on sort of the direction and some of the components, mostly on the, I've been doing, on the brainstorming ideas direction side as opposed to the hands-on making commits, unfortunately, but working with Richard on that stuff. Richard?
Yeah, so I'm in IBM Mersey in the UK, and I'm working with the other guy, Howard Helligan. You've seen him active on some of the projects. The two areas we've been looking at is this Xnode report idea of producing a summary diagnostic report on crashes and so on, and particularly Howard on the LLDB side, so trying to get a debug solution on Linux, which means he's been doing some work in the underlying LLDB project. He's pretty much finished that now and moving on to working with Fedor on his Node plugins on top of that. That's about it.
Okay, so Richard, if you could just type in a few bullet points, because I didn't quite capture all of that.
Okay.
In the things. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda, so let me go back to the end. So actions from last meeting. Let's see if I can find those. I'll put that in the notes as we go. Let's see. I'm going to pull up the issue from last time. See if there were any. Post-mortem. Sorry, it'll take me a second to get to that issue. Node.js. Okay, sorry, I'm just looking for the last. Okay, I guess it should be closed. So I think if I've got the right one, it was April 5th. And I'm just pulling up the meeting notes. Right, okay, so I'm looking to see if there's any actions. Okay, I don't see any actions that we need to follow up on, so I'm just going to say that that's an NA. Sorry, I just want to get that in the notes too. Okay, then moving on to the next item in the agenda. So, where to put code that we're collaborating on? So, issue 30. There has been some discussion in that issue, but I thought it was time that hopefully we can get together and make progress on that particular issue in terms of coming to a consensus. Has everybody had a chance to look at that issue yet, or should we open that up and take a read of it to start?
I read it, so I think I also think I saw Dave comment on it as well.
Okay. I'm just opening it up as well. So I guess the issue is like where is the right place to put code that we're collaborating on? So for example, the LL node, Introduce's been contributing to it, but it's also Richard and Howard have been collaborating in it, and I'm thinking we'll have other things that we want to sort of collaborate in as a team, and so having those under individual repos may not be the right place, or some companies' repos if we can, and not necessarily for all cases, but if we can, it would be nice to have those in a place that's that's common. So I think I'd suggested a couple options. One which is obvious is new projects underneath Node.js itself. We could use folders under the post-mortem repository. We could create a new organization if we don't want it to be as close to the foundation, or just continue to use the personal repositories. So I know there's been some discussion. I think the discussion, Dave was commenting that there's no, you wouldn't necessarily want to move MDB over, right? But and like I said, I don't think everything needs to move over. It's more of if we're collaborating on something new and it makes sense, where do we want that place to be? I've seen unfortunately Duty's not here, but I think he's happy to move LLDB under Node.js. Does anybody have objections to that? Okay.
I mean,
Go ahead.
it's his repository. If he would like to move it, that seems fine.
Okay. And if we are creating new repositories to, we were talking about working on, say, the Node report. It was submitted as a PR before. The suggestion was it would probably make more sense as a module, which I think Richard's pushed on in that direction. Again, if we thought that it made sense to put that under Node.js, does that sound right to people as well, or versus any of the other options, right, that we called out?
Well, I think it should definitely be in its own repository. I mean, if you're going to work on one body of software that's not related to any other bodies of software, probably I would not put it in another repository in a directory, generally.
Yeah. I mean, that's really just a hack if we don't have anywhere else. So, okay, that's good.
So I think, is the macro point that just around the organization of similar tools that various folks in this working group work on, and it's easier to have them under one organization in terms of collaboration and cross-pollination and ease of discovery for folks who are trying to use the tooling. Is that sort of the summary of the goal?
It's ease of discovery, things that we're working on. Also, for us, we have to get approval to contribute to repositories, so if it's actually under the foundation, we've got that approval, where if it's somebody else, we have to go individually and get that, so.
Okay.
Who is we?
Anybody at IBM. So that's just a concrete example of, if it's in one place, it's easier to find and contribute, at least for us, and maybe not the contribute part for other people, but the find and stuff like that, I think is.
So independent of the question of where this stuff lives, could we, if people agree, could we create either a page or maybe just put this in the README with links to the various tools that are part of this working group? Does that make sense? So that the stuff that's under here as well as the stuff that's not could be easily findable. And that might actually be more easily findable even for stuff that is under there, because you can have descriptions of what each thing is.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Certainly a README that says, here are the current things we're currently working on, right? And we'd want to probably keep that up to date to say, yeah, okay. So yeah, that's a good idea. I'm happy to take the action to, do a PR that people can comment on and tweak to get that into the right state, at least for parts of it. I mean, may need help for some of the other ones. Okay, so it sounds like of that, in terms of this particular issue, I'm not hearing any objections to putting things underneath the foundation org. Now, that's not necessarily means we can just do that. We need to talk to the CTC to see if they think it's appropriate as well. But
so, Michael, there was that comment by Rod Vag, but that was mainly about whether these projects would actually have access to the build infrastructure. Is that?
I think that's a little bit different, even. I think once we have agreement that something's under the Node.js organization, we've probably already crossed the line where, using the CI, I think would be reasonable. Now, I may be wrong about that, but I think it's that there'll be even projects that don't make sense to bring under the Node.js organization that might still benefit from using the CI.
Yeah, I guess the issue is where they wouldn't want to take responsibility necessarily for these projects, and they maybe would be worried about the resources used if we started running automatic tests and so on using their machines. But I guess
go ahead.
I guess neither of those things have to be a prereq for moving these projects to the right place. It would be better, from our point of view at least, to have debugger projects somewhere that weren't personally owned, and to make them more visible to the work group.
Right. So it's I think there's, first I want us to, as a group, to come together and say, well, what would we like? What works best for us? Then we need to go to the CTC and say, these projects we'd like to open up underneath. And, there'll be a discussion on whether that makes sense or not. Or there's been lots of discussions as to, bringing in foreign projects, something large like Express, there would be a lot more discussion about. Some of these smaller ones were just starting. I think there may not be some concern, but there's still that checkpoint to say, well, does everybody agree, and I think the CTC in particular, agree that these are things that should move in? The first step for us is, well, as the working group working on them, do we believe that that's where they should go? And so I think that's if we're in agreement, we'll basically take that down, and then we would, I would open an issue for discussion at the CTC level.
I mean, I feel like there's consensus on this at the point.
LL Node has been the first test case for that.
Yeah, so I haven't heard, like said, I don't think I've heard any disagreement. So I'm
not really sure what we would be disagreeing with. It's not really. I mean, if there is a new project, presumably at that point we'll pick where to put it. I mean,
well, like LL Node, for example, we've had some. I think in the past, and the only reason I raised it like this is that there have been some concerns that moving things underneath the foundation, for example, makes it look more official. So if somebody has another tool, they may not want that, right?
I mean, so I think really you've got two concerns, right? One is where the code lives, and the other one is, I mean, people keep talking about discoverability, and I don't think that moving any repository anywhere is really going to substantially increase the discoverability of any of the tooling. I think if you want to address the discoverability angle, then what we need is to put signage and documentation in place in places that people are already looking, rather than in new places, even new repositories under the foundation. I mean, speaking from personal experience at Joint, we have some 100 and some repositories under our account. GitHub does not offer a useful way to sort or filter these things generally. Yep. I mean, the best that you have is vague substring searches. I think. I don't even think you can necessarily sort the results like alphabetically.
So should we just have a place on Node.js.org then that maybe it's like a tooling tab, and then that'll just give you links to, I don't know, all the tools that's available. So I think there's like two things, right? There's like where the code lives, and I think, and that's sort of maybe slightly orthogonal to how to discover these tools, right? As long as you have a pointer to them in one place, then that kind of solves the discoverability problem, right?
Well, and critically, a place that people are already looking needs to connect to that place.
Right. So maybe it's, I don't like that. Maybe it's just a place on the actual website itself. When you go download Node, wherever it is, it'll show you like, hey, did you know there's all these tooling that you can also read up and install and use? That seemed like.
Or maybe something needs to go in the docs. I don't know. I mean, there's a whole working group for the website and docs and stuff, right? There's right. Maybe they have some idea of where it is that people actually land on the website.
Right. So I agree that that's another. As Yunon says, they really will be treated as, we can treat them as two separate concerns. So as our next step on that front, we could open an issue to discuss and put suggestions. Our choices are we find somebody who takes the lead and says, hey, they'll go figure out what to do. Even if we did that, though, we probably want to document and give people some places to comment. So opening an issue on that front probably makes some sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a good idea. I mean, would also a good first step be just to, on the homepage of this working group at least, list off all the tools that are available that's being used, and then associated documentation. That seems like a fairly cheap way right now without having to spent too much time.
Yep. Yeah, I think updating a README update makes sense. Like, I think a README update for this repo that basically says, here's the active things the work group is working on.
Right.
That's a great start.
So would it be helpful for each of the sort of, I guess, owners of the tools to go right at, like, we could have a place that you guys can just add whatever docs you want and links to the tooling that you're providing? So Dave, I would imagine, like Dave and Josh, that you would add a bullet point for him to BB8 and
Yeah, I mean, I can do that.
Cool.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And I guess we could just, like, you could just PR that. So if we just have the README, we create a section where we're going to put that stuff, and then everybody can just add their stuff through PRs, right?
That seems good.
Okay. So that's on that front. On the, again, it's back to, you know, the LLDB in the node report. If there's no objections, we'll take forward the, you know, can we move those projects in? And if, you know, depending on the CTC feedback, we may move back to some of these other options if that for some reason doesn't make sense. Any more discussion on this topic then?
Yeah, well, just one other thing about those L nodes. Having these repositories under a personal account doesn't seem the right thing to me. If people are willing to move them to somewhere more generic, I still think that would be a good idea. Obviously, ones are under join, that's fine. It's going to be around.
I think we've just agreed to do that, though, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I guess I would get out there is that I don't think that the policy moving forward should be that we feel like every new thing that we do necessarily has to fall literally under the namespace of the working group. But I certainly think it's reasonable for us to provide a namespace for people to put things if they want to. But I feel like organizationally, Node has always been about sort of allowing people to experiment in their own world, you know what I mean, with their own modules and their own namespace.
Sure.
And I don't want to introduce the friction of having to coordinate with some other group every time someone wants to have something that does, even if we do want to have it wind up in the README. You know what I mean? So that's
I don't see any expectation that you have to. I think it's just more if it makes sense. Like, you know, in the case of LL, he's happy to move it there. There's contributions, you know, from us as well, so it makes sense. In other cases, yeah, it's not a requirement. It's just an option if it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay. Okay, if we're closed on that issue then, let's move on to the next agenda item. Okay, the next agenda item was JavaScript API to support common extensions between MDB, LLDB, and IDDE. So I'm gonna just spend 1 minute to provide a little context, and then let Richard run with that one. You know, one of the things that we've been trying to do is to figure out how we can start to leverage, you know, our different actions. So, you know, I think Yunong's mentioned and other people mentioned we don't really need 3 different people all creating commands that go and list objects and stuff like that. And so we want to get to the point where we're reusing the code that does that. And one thought that I've been kind of pushing with Richard is that maybe if we move this up to the JavaScript level and have, you know, MDB, LLDB, IDD provides a JavaScript level API, that might be a good level to, you know, achieve that. So Richard, I'll let you take it from there in terms of, you know, what you've already got working and what it kind of looks like, and then we can have the open discussion.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just looking for feedback really at this point if people think this is a good idea. So a core dump contains obviously V8 and Node runtimes, but it also contains all the application code and other modules, Express, so on. So there is a potential, I think, for a wider community to contribute to the kind of an analysis tool that can sit and read a core dump and produce something useful about the state of the runtime when it went wrong, or when it ran out of memory, whatever the problem was. And on top of that, is the ability to write tools and extensions in JavaScript looks like being a much wider community than the people who are prepared to make the effort to write C or C++. And it turns out, at least with LL Node, that it isn't too hard to treat that and its underlying LLDB, which has the core readers, to treat that as a simple C library that you can then build on top of as you would with any native module. So just to show how that might work, I just exported four methods out of Fedor's project into JavaScript land. Just a method to load the dump, given the name of a dump file, a method to give you the number of threads so that you can then use an index to pick a thread, and then having got that thread, an index to pick a frame, and then a method just to print that frame. So just four JavaScript functions. So potentially, obviously, you do the JavaScript heap and allow you to get objects of the heap and build on those. But just for those four methods, you can then write a JavaScript application which could run in Node, which can display the thread stacks, including the JavaScript frames, for a Node process that went wrong. So I've moved the information now to a new issue 33 on the work group. So you can see if you want to pull that up, you can see the names of the APIs, and I put kind of an architecture picture of how it fits together, and also just a little sample of how you can show the thread stacks on a web browser. So there's kind of two motivations really, to allow us to build a wider range of applications to look at core dumps than just the two main line mode debuggers we've got at the moment, which are MDB and LLDB. So a way to build applications on top of that, and also a way to involve people who would rather just write JavaScript. And actually, JavaScript is quite a nice language for scripting. Say you're searching all the objects in the heap, and you want to pull out some particular HTTP request objects, and you want to print certain fields out of those. Then JavaScript is a quicker and easier way of doing that than C++. So it does need has to build on the underlying platform debuggers, which have all the power in them to read the core dumps and to understand native stacks and native modules, and also on top of the plugins which allow you to poke around in the V8 heap. Once you've done all that at the C++ layer, higher level diagnostic commands or utilities could be written in JavaScript. And this is a bit similar to something we did in Java. It doesn't appeal to every JavaScript programmer. It's really the people who are happy with console log and so on aren't going to be interested. But some of the people writing more heavy duty stuff that's in production, where they do get core dumps as their main diagnostic, we think there probably will be at least a small community that would be interested in using that. And we ourselves probably would go on and write some tooling which builds on that ourselves. So that kind of summarizes. I'm interested to know what people's feedback on that.
So I think this is really cool, and honestly, it's something that we've wanted for MDB in general for a while, independent of any of the V8 support. We've always wanted to be able to script, maybe not always, but for the last couple of years we've been talking about being able to script some of the stuff that you can do with MDB D commands, so that you can do sort of more sophisticated things programmatically. The flip side for us is going to be that I think it'll be a pretty big project, relatively big project, for us to add any kind of support to that to MDB. So I think the most likely vehicle for that for us would be to finish up the post-mortem export file format that we've been talking about and get that out into some other program that could then implement the API. I think that's probably what we would do, because I think embedding a JavaScript VM into MDB is going to be kind of a bunch of work that it's going to be more work than that anyway.
And it's not currently it's not currently well factored to be a library. So
yeah, but I do think it's a really cool idea.
Okay, so the idea that you'd have something that runs under MDB that can generate a new file, and then given that new file, the API can introspect.
Yeah, what I'm envisioning is we talked about having this file format as kind of a de facto standard or an actual standard of this group. Yep. We could then build a Node library that would parse that and expose this API, and that could also be an activity of this group if people are interested. And
right.
then actually we could use this for anything else that could export it. In other words, anything else that exported that file format would be able to use this API for. And of course, we could also implement the API directly for LLDB or other debuggers where that's easy to do, which it sounds like is the avenue that's most interesting right now.
Okay, no, that's an path forward, right? Because there's been discussion about like trying to take the commands in MDB and port them to Node and vice versa. And it seems like that's a pretty tough, maybe not tough thinking-wise, but tough from the amount of effort. But this sounds like another way that we can work towards a common set of extensions written in JavaScript. So that, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that actually, Michael, that does fit. That idea of using it as an API for reading a common dump format does fit with what we've done in the past. So if you get the API right, you'll have open dump, and then you do get threads, get stacks, get heap, get object. So the kind of API you need is going to be very similar. And it makes sense to share that. We did, with the old Java one, we did have an API that would also read heap dumps, which were less content. They would give you lots of information about the heap and not so much about the stacks. So yeah, the same API, it would be, in fact, it would be probably a bad idea to have more than one API if we just need to agree on the calls and the kind of syntax that best suit it. And then have that implemented on more than one dump artifact, if you like. Yeah, that's a good.
Okay.
We probably would need to prototype somehow. In fact, it would be very helpful to have more than one base on which to build the API, just so that you don't get locked into one implementation. It'd probably be nice if we could, like say, fake up a copy of the proposed file in the proposed format, and then we can use that test bed alongside the other just to make sure the APIs work with both.
Yeah, that's a good idea. How easy do we think it is to basically create a dummy file which is in that common format that we could then use that as one of the other?
Well, I think have we sort of finalized on the common format? I don't recall that we did that. I mean, I'm happy to just have Dave lead that project, but I think it's really around having someone actually work on it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's been the challenge. I think it's pretty close. I don't think it is actually that much effort. It's just finding time to do it among all the other priorities.
I know Luca was not here, but he had expressed some interest in working on that. And I know him and someone else, I forget. I think David Clements or Mark Clements. Sorry if I forgot the name, but there's a couple of them from Nearform who have shown interest. So maybe that's something that we could just file an issue and then just work sort of asynchronously on to get them up and running.
On that one, or
what's that?
Maybe I was asking, is there already an issue on that, or is it that Dave was working on it and we just haven't gotten that far?
No, there was an issue. We got to the stage of reviewing the proposed format. We went through a couple of cycles on that. It was looking good.
Okay. So what's the next step? Because
I think probably the next step is for someone who has the time to prototype it, basically. And I mean, if other people are interested, great. I can hope to do that by our next meeting. I mean, it's the kind of thing where I had a prototype actually before we even started talking about it that I did in about a half day in a hackathon here. But the difference between that and having something that's more fleshed out is obviously more than, it's many times that. But it's still hopefully not that bad.
Okay, so if you said, okay, you think you could probably have it for the next meeting, right?
I will hope to do that, but I definitely don't want to dissuade anyone else. So if people are interested in taking a swing at that, that would probably be better. But if not, then I will try to get at least something we can talk about for the next meeting.
Right, and the prototype you're talking about, is that like one generated using MDB or something else?
I was actually talking about having an implementation that generates it from at least a trivial dump. I don't know how easy it's going to be to make a dummy. I don't know if it's going to be easier to create a dummy one because it's going to be so hard to know whether that thing looks like the real thing until we at least have an example of that.
But would it have any dependency on other tools, or is it just strictly read the dump?
In the prototype that I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The prototype that I'm envisioning would be a command from MDB-v8 that just does it. So, I mean, it would depend on that, but it wouldn't depend on anything else. And it could also be done with LLDB if that has the facilities needed to do it. You could do it that way if someone were interested in doing that.
So, Richard, I'm wondering if that's something you could put on you and Howard's list.
Yeah, we were thinking of producing the Chrome DevTools format out of LLDB, but that turns out to be not so easy. I don't think we have all the metadata we need, so we could have a look at this instead, or at the same time. Yeah, put that down for me and Howard.
Okay. I think that would be, something that makes sense. If you had those two prototypes, then you said, okay, we've got the different tools; they can generate it. If it's now a good input to these, a JavaScript level API, that's good.
Does anyone know if there are any other kind of introspection APIs that JavaScript has that we might want to model it on? So what's going to happen is when you call an API that says you'll have an iterator over the heap and it's going to return a picture of an object, so that would be a kind of meta object in JavaScript terms. And I just wondered if there's any other APIs around like that. I can have a search. It's the sort of thing that sometimes exists in a debugger API, but it may not exist in the JavaScript language.
The other thing I'd have around that, Richard, is another where you've generated some commands, API. Is something we should have as a target, like the definition of what that API might look like for the next meeting?
Yeah, I can certainly flesh that out into a proposed API. There are a couple of sort of design issues around how you make iterators work, that kind of thing, and whether we use callbacks or not in the API, make it asynchronous.
Right.
So, some fairly key issues there. But that doesn't. I mean, this is early days. This is really. I think we need to concentrate a little bit up front on improving the Linux story generally with LLDB. But in parallel, it would be nice to think of this thing ahead a bit. So yeah, put that down for me to come up with a.
Right. Because I think that fits with this. If we had to look at what the API would look like, and then we can look at that. If you're also looking at the common dump format with LLDB, we can also look at. Okay, can you use that common format to generate what you need through those API calls? There's a lot of synergy there. That's separate still from the definition of the API is good no matter how you do it, even if there's an LLDB native implementation of that. That's having the API defined helps all the different cases no matter what.
Okay, even if it's just a straw map, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we have some good actions. More discussion, comments, thoughts on the JavaScript API side of things? Okay, if not, I guess I just so that I don't misinterpret people. It sounds to me like people are interested in this, think it's a good direction to go. We're thinking that it should be drivable from the common dump format, and individually, if tools want to have their own implementations of it as well. And then that's kind of the level where we look to share commands that pull things out of the dumps. People could write them in JavaScript. Does that sound like a fair characterization to everybody?
Yep, that's what it seems like to me. Be curious to hear what Josh and Dave think.
I mean, I think that to the extent that we've had any success with MDB-V8 at all, it's mostly just because Dave and others, but I think mostly Dave to begin with, just went and built the thing that they needed at the time, and I think it's probably best to focus on building something that you personally or your organization feels is useful directly, because I think it's otherwise we'll end up with a committee-driven design or whatever, or we'll be trying to reinvent the waterfall process or something. So I think just I mean, by all means, get an API together that you feel is useful, and I wouldn't worry too much about the effort duplication thing. Like, I think that ultimately, people are already so strapped for time that it's not like four of us are going to go out and write competing implementations of the thing. I think really just build what you feel is useful, and people will get on board or not. I mean, that's I think that's really what's made Node successful, and most of the projects that are orbiting around Node is that people are just writing code that scratches their itch, and then that turns out to be useful for other people as well.
Okay, anything more to say before we move into the next agenda item? Okay, I guess the next thing then is Node report as a module bundled into Node. So this is early, but we'd had proposed a PR to put a Node report into the core Node itself, and I guess the pushback was that it didn't necessarily need to be part of core, and we should keep Node core small. But what I wanted to get feedback from this group is, if there was a module that did that, is that something that we think should be part of the Node binaries that get shipped out? Versus something people have to go and know that they can add, and it's just it's there and you can actually turn it on.
Well, I mean, I think once upon a time, like the whole MDB-V8 static library was, the shared library rather, was part of the Node. I want to say the distribution. I don't remember, but like, is that sort of the model that we're looking for?
Well, so when MDB-V8 was built into Node, part of the reason for that was because the idea was that it would be easier to pull it out of the binary that it was in. In other words, there was an actual reason why it is able to be better inside that than it could be outside. But we ended up getting rid of that anyway. And I kind of think the general policy for Node Core, I think, unless it's changed, I haven't been following it as closely, has been that anything that can be done outside of the core is better done outside the core, because it allows that iteration to happen without the friction of being in core, and sort of avoiding a lot of the discussion, the need for consensus. People can just decide what they're going to do and then see what people end up adopting. I don't know that there's like a lot of controversy over this particular one or anything, but I guess I kind of agreed with Julian's comments in the thread that I'm not sure if there's a reason why this has to be in core, and I could see a lot of reasons why you might want to iterate on this without having to release new Node versions. You might want a new version of the Node report thing, for example, that includes a bunch more information and not have to upgrade Node in order to do that. You could upgrade it like any other module.
Right. So having done that, though, you could still ship the Node, a version of the module with Node, so that you may not have the latest one, but you would, like we ship NPM.
Well, but so that historically has been a source of tremendous grief as well. Like, I mean, I recall when Joyent was still chiefly responsible for Node, there were a lot of tensions around which version of npm to ship, and whether or not shipping, this was quite early in the npm corporate days, and there were concerns about, they wanted us to just ship basically the latest master in Node. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to ship something that had tests and functioned. But I think there were a lot of there was mostly pain created by that co-shipping scenario, because I mean, and also the npm position was mostly just like, regardless of what you get in Node, you would just install the latest one with that. So I mean, the synergies are not quite as great, I think, when
Right.
when you
In that
consider the
case,
downside of like there's, if you're not consuming a private interface of Node, like where where the module itself uses some internals that you can't, that are not stable, and you have no way to make that work from outside the core consolidation, then yeah, I mean, obviously you need to put it in core at that point. But if you're only consuming, to the extent that Node has any public stable interfaces, if you're only consuming those, then I would very strongly suggest that you want to be in a module that people just install through their package JSON, really.
I mean, is it around like, hey, I think it comes down to like discoverability, right? Like if you're new to Node, or you're using it but you don't know that these tools exist, it's really around making it easy to get these tools. And I agree that like shipping it as part of the distribution brings in other issues that's not strictly related to just discoverability. Like I wonder what other runtimes do, like the JVM and Python, or whether they bundle tooling with the runtime, or whether they just make that available for you to install easily or discover easily from a centralized location.
I guess it's also how you draw the line. Like this functionality is clearly a core part of our VM. Like the ability to do basic diagnosis and generate, the Java core is a long-standing thing, which is similar, and which we found very, very useful in our service engagements. It's just part of the runtime, and we wouldn't imagine having to get people to install something else to make that work. So that's where sort of part of my thinking is coming from, is if somebody has a problem and you want to help them, you just want them to be able to have this and be able to enable it easily, versus perhaps go to their legal to get clearance for another module and then install it, and
But what about when the one that they happen to have in their crummy old LTS version of Node is like 3 years out of date and doesn't have any of the telemetry you're actually looking for?
Well, I guess that's where the disconnection causes some grief. In this case, there is, to get some of the interesting information, there's a bit of a link with V8 in the first place. Yeah, I don't know.
So
which way
if there are V8 private things that you need to put in, then what I think makes sense is to put, to the extent that you need private internal details of V8 exposed as a public API, I would expose that as a public API. I would go and do the bare minimum amount of work to create a stable API surface area within Node that allows you to get the information that you want, but also allows other people to get that same information, so that you can keep, most of the porcelain sort of stuff, if you will, in a place where you can make it better all the time without having to reach consensus and deal with LTS versions and stuff. I think you want to put, like, this was the with the, I think it's async wrap and the tracing API that thing that was going on that Trevor was working on for a long time, and I think it got too. The tracing thing tried to do too many things. It tried to be too opinionated. It was too complicated. It had a lot of sort of different levels of convenience features built on top of it, which when really what we wanted was just the ability to fire a hook function or whatever on the way in and out of various async things. So the actual API that needed to go in core was just the part that let you run code at the right times, not track trees of events and dependent events and do pruning on that tree of things that you want to trace or not trace. So I think that on the one hand, it's true that there may be some private interfaces that you need to consume to do this, but on the other hand, maybe the correct way to go is to create the smallest possible public API surface area in Node core, and then you can build dependent modules on top of that outside in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two, yes, separating into the module is one aspect, I understand. The other one, I was just trying to get at this one, and maybe it's not a different thing, was that even if you've separated that out, so, in the case, like you said, they've got the old crappy one, you can ask them to do an npm install and get the new one. Having something, you're in the middle of a problem, having something already there can be quite useful at times versus having to, like I said, potentially get more legal review and be okay to install new things in production.
So I mean, I think really it'd be more helpful to list the trade-offs between this conversation. I feel like there's a lot of pretty valid points or stuff around. Hey, I don't want to have to get legal to sign off on another tool. If it was just bundled with Node, then they'd be okay. There's the flip side of that, which I think Josh gave some examples around. Bundling software that's not strictly related to the runtime itself, that could be optional. So I think it would be helpful to capture that in maybe a list of the trade-offs, and then we can talk about that at the next meeting.
So yeah, that makes sense. So so we can take it back to GitHub, write a list of pros and cons, and carry on the discussion from that. That sounds like a great idea.
So one question I would have, and I don't know if this is just to frame that sort of pro-con list, but something I'm wondering is, I think all these arguments make sense in favor of putting it in core, but I'm not sure why they're different than any other module that you might want to put in core. There's all kinds of things related to error handling and synchronous control flow, and and HTTP is in core, for example. Maybe that didn't have to be. I don't know, but I think one thing the angle through which I would like to answer those questions about the pros and cons and figure out whether this makes sense is to figure out, how is this different from all that other stuff? How is this different from any other module that someone would want to get into core so that they don't have to worry about the legal thing, so that it's there, and so on?
I guess I see it as a fundamental, problem diagnosis is a fundamental capability. Now, not necessarily the deluxe version, but a minimal set of diagnosis support is just part of what you need in the runtime. If we couldn't do core dumps, for example, it would be, well, wait a sec, do you need to install a module just to get a regular C core dump out?
No, well, the operating system does that.
You technically do, right? You have to have GDB or Gcore or whatever, depending on the. I guess part of it is I think this is tooling, so it's sort of hey, if I were to run this and this is where having a list would be helpful of the pros and cons. At least from our perspective, we would probably shy towards not bundling, just because we'd much rather like to have finer grain control in the versions of the various toolings that we use. For example, npm is a good example of this, where for the longest time we definitely did not want to use the default npm that was shipped with Node, because the 3.x version was troublesome and not performant and not important. But there's a bunch of issues with it, which they've been working on, which is great. But obviously that wasn't really production-ready software that we were willing to invest in. But the fact that Node would ship that as the default distribution meant that then we had to go and pick and backfill or backport the specific version that we want. And with tooling, I think it's similar, right? We installed GDB on our running instances so that we can take a core dump, and then we'll install MDB v8 if and when we need that tooling. And we have less sort of issues with the legal aspect of it, having to get permission to run various tooling. Now, maybe that could also be solved by having no report of these tooling live under the same organization, living the foundation or something, maybe that would solve the legal aspects of it. But I do think there is merit towards not bundling and having folks opt into the distribution rather than having to explicitly opt out. But again, that's something we think we should formulate a list and discuss further, because I think there's
exactly. I
points on
think
both
that's
sides.
sort of the nub of the question here is post-mortem and generating like some core diagnostics when you have a failure core enough that you want to include it, or no, it's, it should just be separate.
Yeah, like I wonder, like for the JVM, like Flight Recorder is a tool that that immediately comes to mind. I wonder if they ship that with the runtime, or if that's a separate tool that you have to download.
Well, I mean, I think one that I can talk to is Health Center. So Health Center is a more sophisticated tool. You can dynamically attach, and you can see GC activity, and you can do different things, right? But at the same time, that's in the VM. So that's not bundled. You can the logic to support it is bundled, but the UI that connects to it isn't.
That's right. The basic VM does have capability in it to produce good messages, produce basic heap dumps, core dumps, and a report type dump, and it does have the inbuilt tracing. You can get some trace coming out. So yeah, there is more bundled into the core of the VM, both the Oracle and the IBM ones, than you have in Node. Node is a leaner.
Right.
Now this stuff always does come on later on in the cycle of a product, which speaks to that thing about, hey, the one I've got in my version of Node is a bit rubbish. Well, this stuff tends to develop in release 3, release 4, and by the time you get heavy production use of Java, that stuff was pretty solid and in place in the core. So out of the box, you would get probably enough to diagnose a fair proportion of problems that you'd have to send back to the service team. It was the kind of extra standalone GUI tools that give you the higher analysis, which were separately delivered. So yeah, the level you've got in Node at the moment is pretty light from that point of view. But I can see there's more coming on the trace side, and this looks like there's more coming on the ability to attach a debugger. But yeah, I think we're running out of time now. But maybe we should have this on one of the issues, and we can just run the pros and cons on the issue.
Yep.
That sounds good.
Okay, yeah, because I think you're right. Oh yeah, we're past time, so I'm going to move on to. I'll take the action to open up an issue, CC everybody to start commenting on that, and that's the end of the agenda. So, does anybody else have anything else we should talk about before we close the meeting?
Just really quickly, I know Node Summit's coming up, so a bunch of folks are going to be in the area. So I thought we should maybe have a casual get-together or something, just that folks meet in person.
Actually, that'd be great. There was an APM Summit being scheduled the day before, but I don't think that's going to happen anymore.
Yeah, I don't know that. I heard some people. I don't know that we want like a super sort of strict.
Yeah.
We must go and have laptops and talk about stuff and whiteboard.
No.
But I thought more just like maybe we could book a table at a bar or a pub or something and just meet and just chat informally.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say I'll be there the day before and have time. So.
Right. So that's something that I don't know if Josh and Dave have the appetite for.
I like the pub.
We'll definitely
All
do
right,
that.
well, in that case, I'll set something up and then I will just. So is it the day before? Is that a good time for everyone?
Which
What
day
is that day?
I
Monday?
think is that the Tuesday or the Monday? I don't.
It's the Monday. There's.
Oh yeah,
4
What is
days.
the date?
Monday, July 25th.
I remain cautiously optimistic.
I should be able to do that.
Okay, cool. So I will. I'll get something set up and then I'll forward you guys an invite to something. That'll work.
Okay.
That's
Sounds
all I
good.
have. All right.
Well, thanks for everybody attending, and I'll try and set. We'll try and get together, say, in another month or so, because it sounds like we got some good actions, and hopefully we'll have more to talk about.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Talk to everybody later.
Thanks.